Thank you for joining us as we present our Year 4 history lesson, Should Uluru Be Closed for Climbing? This lesson was put together by Lydia, Alistair, Brittany, Mikaela and Georgia. It is the 5th lesson in a 6-lesson unit plan linked to the inquiry question, how have laws affected the lives of people past and present? Each lesson is a double lesson and therefore goes for 90 minutes. So far, the students have been developing an understanding of the significance of Uluru, its history and its meaning, and its impact on Indigenous Australians. In this lesson, the teacher will summatively assess the students on their ability to plan, present, and reflect on a structured debate. It links to the achievement standards. In history, students analyse sources to detect points of view, and in HASS, students explain how and why life changed in the past and identify aspects of the past that have remained the same. The content descriptors it links to are interact with others with respect to share points of view, and the differences between rules and laws, why laws are important and how they affect the lives of people, including experiences of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. The elaboration it would be linked to would be participating in role plays and simple debates which allow for equal presentation of viewpoints. Its cross-curriculum connections are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures, and it links to the general capabilities, intercultural understanding, and critical and creative thinking. The learning goals that the students would be given at the beginning of the lesson would be: we are learning to use history to develop an understanding of the present. We are using empathy to express points of view about laws of the past and present and future. The learning intentions that we would want the students to know would be: laws have changed over time and that this affects the lives of people past and present. Also, we would want them to know how to respectfully participate in an active discussion and debate, expressing their point of view with confidence. For what we would want them to be able to do, we would want them to plan and present an argument that supports a point of view and compare the argument from both sides of for and against. And we would want them to explain how laws have changed and how laws and lack thereof affect communities of people past and present. We would want them to understand that history shapes the present and that the world is forever evolving, meaning changes are inevitable. We would also want them to understand that cultural perspectives and beliefs that are different from their own. The success criteria the students would be given is: I can plan and present an argument that supports a point of view. I can compare an argument from both sides of for and against, and I can explain how laws have changed and the effect that these laws have had on people past and present. We hope our lesson can inspire some ideas that you can implement in your own classroom.
Okay, so following on from the introduction where they sat down and used a smart board as a visual aid with the Uluru picture on there, we're going to get the students into table groups. So students will discuss and brainstorm what the landmark is, where it is located and its importance in Australian history, culture and the identity of Indigenous Australians. So the point of this brainstorming activity is to get the students in mixed ability groups. Now that means we're not going to have one table that's just going to throw all the answers and everything we want out of the lesson to us and one table that sits quietly in the corner. We really want to get pockets of good contribution from everyone. So what they'll do in this activity is, in their mixed ability groups, they will have to record their knowledge, ideas, keywords and questions on butcher's paper. So they're going to use coloured textures, they're going to make it all seem very linked to themselves and so they can understand it. And we're going to have students who are going to really love recording and writing these things down and using things that they've learnt specifically in these lessons, which is great. And we're going to have some students that are going to really love rattling off things they heard, they thought they knew, challenging things. So that's really what we want out of it, is small groups, small mixed ability. So there's going to be lots of people who are going to be throwing ideas, we hope, out of that lesson. So then they're going to come in and use this as a bit of an opportunity for the teachers to come through and see where the students are at so far in the unit. So it'll be more acting as a revision tool as well, but also a really good tool for contributing to some classroom discussion. So what we want them to do after they've gone through and they've been given a bit of time, we probably want them to get, 5 to 8 minutes of really rattling off a few ideas, and a few kids with some texters and writing things down. You want to give the students a little bit of time with a couple of key speakers to briefly share their brainstorming results with the group. So we want them to decide on who their key speakers are, and then we'd like them to present that to the teacher. And that will be with their overarching facts and their key messages about Uluru significance and what they've taken out of it. This can be great because what we want to do is we will also, at the front of the classroom, we will also be recording this down. So writing on the whiteboard, using really good points for and against or whatever to really link us up for the debate as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to leave that on the board. So when people are doing this debate, it gives them a little help to rehash some memory under a bit of pressure. They can really work with it, and it might trigger some really, really interesting points, which will be really good. So we do want these students to have a real good opportunity to be able to work within groups that maybe they wouldn't usually work in if they say they were working in maths or English or something like that, and then really work together and then see how they can go with setting up this debate that's coming up. So they will then go from that to the next part of the lesson, which is about watching this video, which is further explained by Mikaela.
Okay, so leading on from the brainstorming activity, as a class we would then view a YouTube video that would introduce students to the closing of Uluru for climbing. The video focuses on different perspectives, including Indigenous perspectives of closing Uluru for climbing and tourist perspectives. From the video, I would then display on the smartboard the overarching question of the lesson, which would be, should Uluru remain closed for climbing? From here, I would facilitate a class discussion about students' opinions of this question. I would ask them, what do you think about closing Uluru for climbing? What are some of the reasons it should stay open? What about why it should stay closed? So they could draw upon what they saw in the video or their knowledge from prior lessons within this unit. And then on the whiteboard, like I've done on the small whiteboard that I have, I would split it into two columns, one saying for closing the climb and the other column saying against closing the climb. And as we were having that class discussion, I would just record students' ideas this way, and then keep this available throughout the lesson on the board so students can refer to it throughout the lesson. So from this discussion, I would then move on to explaining the activity for the lesson. I would say to students, today we are going to debate in small teams about whether or not Uluru should be open for climbing. I would ask students, well, what is a debate? How does it work? Have you ever seen a debate or been in a debate? And then I'd have a conversation with the students about debates and how they are structured. I would then split the class into half. One half for and one half against for the closure of climbing Uluru. To do this, I might just simply split through the middle of the class where everyone is sitting, and then the students on the left, half of the room could work together debating for the closure of Uluru for climbing, and then the students on the right side of the room can work together debating against the closure of climbing Uluru. I would explain to students that these groups are their big debate teams. And then within these halves, I would split the students into groups of 4. I would say to them, in the debate, you won't just get to argue what you believe about the closure or keeping open Uluru for climbing. Instead, your smaller groups will be arguing from a particular perspective. So if you are in a debate team arguing for the closure of Uluru for climbing, you will be arguing from the perspective of either an Indigenous elder, a passionate Australian Indigenous rights activist, or a park ranger. If you are from the debate team arguing against the closure of Uluru for climbing, you'll be arguing from the perspective of either a tourist, a tour guide, or just an average Joe. I would then provide each group of 4 with a roll card, which would have, if they are for or against the closure of climbing Uluru, the character, and then a small description about that character. After all groups were provided with a roll card, I would then explain to students what their task will be by saying something like, your task today is to work in your groups to write an argument from the perspective of your group's character. So not your perspective, but your group's character. On your roll cards, you will have a description about your character and how they think and what they think about the closure of Uluru. This might help you to think of some ideas that could form your argument. Remember that you may not actually agree with the perspective of your character, but in this task, I'm asking you to try and see it from their view. So as an example, if you're in the group arguing against closing the Uluru climb from the perspective of a tour guide, you might argue that if Uluru is closed to climb, you will lose your job and you won't be able to pay your bills. You could also argue that being able to climb Uluru is a valuable experience for your people that you're taking on tour guides. What else could you argue from this perspective of that tour guide? And then there I would facilitate a class discussion and then draw on a few of students' ideas. I would then say to the students, after formulating strong convincing arguments in your groups, you will present these arguments as a team in a class debate. Each group member must speak in the class debate for at least 1 minute. And are there any questions about what you need to do? So just before sending the students off, I would suggest to students, if they would like, they can allocate group roles, which they would be familiar with doing. They could have roles like a recorder, a team leader, or a timekeeper, just to make sure the group work is moving smoothly.
This section of the lesson is focused on the content exploration. So more specifically, this is when students will have time to gather their ideas, formulate their arguments, and practice among themselves in preparation for the final debate. This should take about 40 minutes, as this time is allocated for both the preparation and the final debate itself. Students will gather on their sides of for and against and use their character cards and the brainstormed points on the board to structure their arguments. As the teacher, I will walk around and facilitate discussions, prompt ideas where needed, provide feedback, and answer any questions. It's also a good idea to be jotting down the questions that students may have, as a lot of the time they will benefit most students. So answering them as a group is a really good idea. These notes are also very much used for formative assessment, so ensuring students are on track and sort of gauging any common misconceptions throughout the class. So once students have been given time to prepare their argument, there will be a 5-minute warning for them to make final touches, wrap up their discussions, and prepare for the debate. So once this time has come to an end, I will use the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 attention gaining strategy to bring everyone back as a group. They will then arrange themselves in sides. So I'll ask, for example, the for group to put their chairs on the left facing inward and the against group on the right doing the same thing, and definitely ensuring there's room in the middle for the students who are speaking. Ideally, a podium would be really great. It would just depend on the school's facilities, but even just a table could be used for that. The debate structure will be reiterated for students, so in terms of the purpose of turn taking, or essentially the rebuttal, so allowing students to organise themselves in such a way that their rebuttal will flow, so organising their points. It is a requirement for students to speak for 1 minute each. The students will be getting up in pairs to say their piece. Therefore, a 2-minute timer will be on the board to keep the debate structured. It will commence with little guidance from the teacher, so we definitely want this to be a student-led activity. The teacher will be guiding it, of course, but very much more assessing the students, so writing notes on each student individually, because this will be formally assessed against the marking rubric that is available in the appendix of the lesson plan. So looking at things like tone of voice, clear volume, if their points are valid and if they've justified them, and a few other marking criteria that's available, as I said, in the lesson plan. It is also noteworthy that this lesson and debate has been provided to give students an opportunity to participate in a formal discussion, a formal debate structure, as well as practice their public speaking skills. So this could very much be a catalyst for anxiety for a lot of students and make students feel quite uncomfortable. However, utilising groups and getting up in pairs to speak is a good way to encourage peer support while still facilitating those uncomfortable learning experiences that very much have really positive outcomes. So once the debate is over, the teacher will formally close it and ask just students to take 1 minute to silently reflect upon their argument, how they went, how they felt, and then the final part of the lesson, the conclusion part of the lesson, will commence.
In the final part of the lesson, once students have completed their debate, they will come together as a class to discuss how successful they think the lesson went. This provides the students with an opportunity to reflect on the task directly after completing the debate with a fresh mind. They will talk about what they thought went well and what they thought they could improve on. Because there's only 10 minutes to this section of the lesson, the general class discussion will be kept short, just enough time for students to settle back down and express any excitement they had over the debate. They will have time to reflect properly during their self-reflection task in the next lesson. The teacher will then instigate a class discussion in relation to their debate over the closure of Uluru, which connects back to the big idea: how laws have changed over time and how they have an impact on people past and present. The essential questions that I'll be asking students are: how have laws affected the lives of people, both past and present? Students may need a prompt in this question, such as, so consider the impact the closing of the climb had on Indigenous people, and this should spark discussion. The next question is, why is Uluru more significant to Indigenous people than other cultures? So where to next? Well, lesson 6, the final lesson in the unit, will be a reflective task whereby they will write a reflective summary on their debate. The structure of the reflection will be as follows. Students can describe the debate, express feelings and thoughts about the debate, evaluate, and then conclude. Reflective summaries are useful as they provide students with the opportunity to engage with the big ideas and understandings on a deeper level. Students who struggle with public speaking have the opportunity to fully engage in the process of meaning making. Students are able to self-reflect on their engagement with the task and provide any feedback on areas they may have struggled or excelled in. This is also really useful for the teacher when planning to teach this again in the future, as the teaching can be altered. It also helps to develop students' self-regulation skills and ownership in their learning. Students will be assessed on both individual and on a collective level through their interactions with peers, presentation techniques, and the ideas that were presented through the debate. The teacher will take summative assessment notes based on the success criteria and will give each student a mark that will be graded in conjunction with their reflection, which they will complete in Lesson 6. Thanks so much for listening, and we hope you enjoyed our lesson.